I'm going to go tell people I'm not printing.
Can they hear me okay? I mean, the ones that are coming in?
Yeah, it looks like it.
We can hear you fine.
Climbing pretty fast. Well, for those of you that can hear me, can they hear me okay, Jake? We're trying something new today. We're recording from the studios at the law firm of Tyler Bursch. So if there are technical problems, we apologize in advance, but we think it's going to work out pretty well. This is the class on the new standard of practice 10.5. And so we've got about 135 registered. We're at about 72 right now. A couple of housekeeping items. I'm hands-free, so I don't have control of anything other than my voice. So if you have a question or you want to make a comment, what I would prefer is let me go through the program. It's about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half if I move along at the most. And then there'll be a whole period of time for comments, questions, and answers. So I want to try to do it that way. But if you have a question that you just can't wait to answer, put it in the Q&A. Jake Tyler, a very competent young man, is going to monitor it and will let me know what the questions are. And I don't know if Lori and or Linda are professional standards administrators are able to look at those questions as well. If they are, then they might be able to even answer them as we move. So a couple of other things as we get ready to start in about a couple of minutes. I'm going to let people keep pouring in, but these are the people that administer our professional standards. You guys are the hearing officers. You're my board of directors. You are my grievance people. You're the cream of the crop. Therefore, I'm not going to wait too long. Normally, when I do a Zoom program, I give everybody a little extra time because they're people come in a little bit late. But you're hearing officers, you're supposed to be on time. So we're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're already up to 100, it looks like. So we're pretty well done. This is the first time we've done something new, something else. This is the first time that I can recall that I have personally done a program for 3 associations at the same time. We have with us today the grievance people, the professional standards people, and many of the directors of the 3 associations of Tri-Counties, of Pacific West, and of Southwest Riverside County. So I want to welcome all of you. I've spoken to the 3 presidents, well, 2 of the 3 presidents, but in getting messages, I understand that all 3 presidents, whether it be Terry Ryan of Southwest, whether it be Rick Violet of Pacific West or Brian Yates of Tri-Counties, all welcome you. I know that they're very grateful that you're willing to participate in this program. I can no longer see myself, but I'm assuming that you can see me. I can see no one. I can't even see Linda or Lori. I want to thank both of them for their input into this program. The 3 associations are blessed to have the 2 best professional standards administrators in the state. And that's not just me talking, that's coming from both NAR and CAR. I spoke yesterday with the people from NAR. I'm going to tell you what they had to say about what's going on around the country. Some really interesting examples of some of the things that are going on around the country. So it's 10:01. I'm going to stall for another 2 or 3 minutes, but it looks like we're getting pretty close to capacity, and I want to get started as quickly as possible. Jake's going to put the PowerPoint up on the screen. I don't know if it was sent out, if it's available. If it is, then you can take notes. If it's not, I'm happy to send you a copy of this PowerPoint. This is the first time we've done this, so there may be some things I'm going to want to fix, particularly when we get to the hypotheticals. I just want to see if we can get some consistency in the way we're going to handle this. So let's put the PowerPoint up, Jake, if you don't mind, please, and we'll get started. Okay, let's go to the first slide that says overview, if you don't mind, please. I think it's number 3. there's our blatant commercial billboard. All the things that Tyler Bursch does. All right, so here we go. So we're going to talk about, what are we talking about? You know, what's going on here? Why did this even happen? What has changed? Because a lot of people think that there's been a whole lot changed, and really it's a fairly narrow perspective. I want to talk about what CAR is doing about some of the stuff. We're going to talk about some other things that NAR is doing and some plans that they have. We're going to clarify some things because there's a lot of talk out there. I mean, I've got reams of paper on things people are talking about, from constitutional issues to issues regarding procedure. So I want to clarify some stuff. We're going to talk about procedure because, again, this is for the professional standards hearing people, for grievance, and for the directors who will hear appeals. We're going to define hate speech. We're actually going to jump in and talk about, what are we talking about? What does hate speech really mean? And I'm going to raise some issues for another day. We're going to be doing a housing symposium. I can't remember the day. Southwest is doing one, I think, on March 12th, not a housing symposium, but we're going to have the Department of Fair Housing lawyer come in and talk to those people. And then, of course, Pacific West and Tri-Counties is going to do a housing symposium with the NAR and CAR people. So we're going to talk about that. Then I'm going to open it up. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work yet. Jake is going to work his magic, and we're going to have some interchange. I'm going to throw out a couple of hypotheticals, things that people are asking me about, things that people are asking NAR about. Diane, who is my counterpart at NAR, was kind enough to send me a list of the common questions that they've been getting, which frankly are the same as the common questions that I've been getting. So I'm just going to throw some stuff out for conversation. I want you to remember a couple of things. We all saw what happened yesterday, and we all saw what happened in Portland, and we all saw what happened in Seattle and all over the country. We're not like all those people. We're not like the people that are promoting that kind of violence. We are realtors. We are people that have class. We are people that are professional. And therefore, whether you disagree with somebody else on a particular point or not, you are going to be respectful of everybody's opinion. This is important. It's probably the single most important thing we're going to hopefully come away with today, is that this isn't about our political views, although we all have them. This is not about our religious viewpoints, although we all have our faiths. This is about respecting each other and each other's opinion. And frankly, I'm very troubled about what I hear a lot of times. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of examples of cases that have already been filed around the country. And I'm going to show you the level of hate that really is going on right now. It's not limited to Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, or liberals. It is out there, and it is serious. So let's go to the first or the next slide, please, Jake, if you don't mind. Well, okay, so what are we talking about? Well, most of you already know that on November 13th of last year, the National Association of Realtors approved some fairly substantial recommendations that came from the Professional Standards Committee. They changed the National Association of Realtors policies and expanded the Code of Ethics to cover non-real estate related activities. To my knowledge, it's the first time we've done that. Now, in the bylaws, we do have things that are non-real estate related. If you get convicted of a felony relating to moral turpitude, if you get suspended by the Department of Real Estate, you can lose your membership. Those are bylaw issues. But in the articles of the Code of Ethics, everything up to this point has been limited to real estate related activities, and that changed. So now, and I'm going to show you an example later, now if you engage in what is considered hate speech or harassing speech, and it is not related to your real estate activity, you can still be brought up on ethics charges, and if so, you can be sanctioned. They also modified, and we're going to do a deep dive into Article 10, Standard of Practice 10.5, because it limits restrictions on harassing speech, which will be defined for you today. Hate speech, epithets, and slurs, all words that are thrown about today, like the word racist or the word sexist or homophobe, but there are actual definitions, which as hearing officers and as grievance officers, we're going to actually look at what the word means from an official Webster dictionary type point of view. And then, of course, they modified the standard of practice relative, excuse me, the definition of a public trust. Most of you know, all of you should know that if you are found guilty by the hearing panel and ratified by the board of directors for a public trust violation, that is to be reported nationwide to whatever governmental entity in California, the Department of Real Estate, in order to determine whether your license will be affected. Originally, the idea was to expand public trust to include any discrimination, but I know that in talking to the contact that Lori Smith introduced me to at CAR, who is in charge of investigations, the DRE took the position they're not going to deal with non-real estate activities. However, as we'll see later, there are other ways that you can be punished. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So why did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, there's a book, and I don't know if you can see it. It's a book that was given to me. Laura Halverson, who's the CEO over at Tri-Counties, suggested that I read it. It's a wonderful book. I got my degree in history, so I'm always interested in history. It's called The Color of Law, and it talks about, and today we all know what goes on today and how NAR and CAR promote fair housing. They promote equality, they promote inclusiveness, and the idea that everyone is entitled to buy a house. But that hasn't always been the case. NAR has historically supported activities that frankly were particularly as it applies to color, in terms of zoning, in terms of particular housing restrictions, in terms of allowing people to live in certain neighborhoods based on the color of their skin and things of that nature. So they recognized, the NAR people, that they had a history that needed to be rectified. Of course, all of us, including yesterday, have seen what's been going on for the last, well, for quite a long time, but recent events since of course, May, have taken place and been on the front pages. And while we can all argue about whether the coverages have been equal and this and that and all the other political nonsense, the fact is that we've got some real issues in this country, a lot of social unrest, a lot of events that have taken place that have, frankly, for those of us that are a bit older, have shocked us because we've not seen a lot of this since the Vietnam War. A big issue took place, most of you have heard about by now, in Long Island, New York, that really embarrassed NAR. Newsday magazine sent out African Americans, they sent out Hispanics and Asians as buyers, and they went to real estate offices in the Long Island area of New York to try and buy houses, and they discovered over the course of a 2-year, what essentially was a sting operation, that when you were African American, the odds were 49% that you were not going to be treated equally, which Article 10 says you're to be treated. If you were Hispanic, that number was 39%, and if you were Asian, it was 32%. In other words, if you were a member of one of those groups, that the odds were anywhere between 32 and 50% that you weren't going to get to see the house you wanted. And the discrimination was far-reaching, from appraisal discrimination, where they actually put pictures of people on fireplaces that were black, and an appraiser would come in, appraise the house, find out, look at the pictures of the family and appraise the house lower. Then when they took the pictures off of those mantles and appraised the houses with people without people of color being shown as the owners, and those houses tended to be appraised higher. From not being allowed to show houses, from people showing up at properties and not being allowed in, all sorts of discrimination. And again, being a white male, I try to put myself, what would it be like? What would it feel like to be treated like that? And so when that report was published, it created a ripple effect that was very embarrassing. And then, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the social media outbursts that I've seen even over the last couple of days by NAR members, whether they be members of one of the 3 boards that are here today or anyone else. We saw some pretty shocking comments that really shocked the leadership of the National Association. They started to take a look as they started to delve into this topic at the preamble. I know that when I teach the Code of Ethics and when Barbara teaches the Code of Ethics, we talk about the preamble. Why? Because the preamble sets up the reason for the 17 articles. And one of those things says, look, we're to zealously support and enforce standards within our industry. So a question came up by one of the defense lawyers that I know, are we raising the bar here? Are we creating more exposure? And the answer is a resounding you bet. We have seen NAR purposefully raise the bar relative to the way realtors are to behave. The idea being, if you're going to discriminate, then the industry will be better off without you. So let's move on to the next slide, please. All right. So another thing that happened that I thought was kind of interesting, and I've never seen it before, our new president, your new president, I'm not a realtor, created what was called, some people didn't like it, some people thought it was historic, but he apologized for NAR's historic behavior. And he did it in a way that created a lot of talk. And again, at the bottom line, at the core of, if you're a right-thinking person, this does reflect badly on the industry. We all know that a few bad apples can spoil the entire barrel, and therefore they felt that even though this certainly isn't reflective of the entire membership or even a majority of the membership, it did, those situations that did come up in Long Island, some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, reflected badly. And then we revisited Article 10. Now remember, Articles 1 through 9 are duties that you owe to your clients and your customers. Things like fiduciary obligation, cooperating with other agents, exaggeration, misrepresentation, restrictions, all those things. That's 1 through 9. Article 10 is the first of the duties that are owed to the public by all realtors. And it says, in part, realtors shall not deny equal professional services, broad term, to any person for reasons, and again, for reasons of race, the characteristics of color, the characteristics of religion, the characteristics of sex, handicap, familial status, children, age, things like that, national origin, where you come from, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And I think we can look at that and say, well, gosh, every one of us is in one of those classes. So basically, you don't discriminate because of a person's characteristic relating to one of those categories. Realtors shall not be parties to any plan or agreement to discriminate against a person or persons on the basis of those 9 classifications. Then you see there's 3 dots, which means there's more to it. What Article 9 goes on to say is you also will not discriminate based on your hiring practices relative to all the different characteristics. I want to point out, remind y'all, we're in California. If I'm in Tennessee, these 9 characteristics are the characteristics I'm worried about. But if I'm in California, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there are 22 of these categories, from immigration to military service. There's all kinds of different categories, but for purposes of the grievance committee and or a hearing panel or the board on appeal, we will limit ourselves to these 9 categories for the Code of Ethics. I would point out, I had a great conversation yesterday with my counterpart at NAR, and we were in agreement that of the 22 categories in California, a lot of it would bleed over into one of these 9. For example, if I discriminate based on immigration, I'm probably discriminating based on national origin or a color or race or something along those lines. So there is a lot of bleeding into the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, but that doesn't mean that if I say I'm going to discriminate based on an immigration issue, that's not going to be an Article 10 issue. That's going to be something for either another Code of Ethics violation or something to report to the Department of Real Estate. So let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, so what did they do? Well, as I mentioned before, they've changed their bylaws and their policy manuals. I'm not going to bore you with lots of reading today, but what they really did is they said, look, in all of your activities, whether it's real estate or not, if you discriminate, if you engage in any form of discrimination based on those 9 categories in any of your life activities, or you commit fraud because somebody is old, and again, you go into those kinds of characteristics, and not old, but excuse me, as a single mom, say, familial status, or because they don't speak English very well, a race issue or an ethnicity issue. If you do that and you commit any fraud, not just a fraud that leads to a substantial economic harm, but any fraud, you're going to be up on charges. They changed that. They also made it clear that some of these articles are really going to be limited to real estate, right? Because if you discriminate against your client, well, that's still a client. That's still going to be related to real estate activity. So Articles 1 through 9 have some practical limitations, but Article 10 says in all of your other activities, and I'm going to show you an example of a guy that had nothing to do with real estate that has got some problems for himself in Arizona. And then they specifically revised Standard of Practice 10.5. Grievance, you guys, we're going to talk about this when we do your training next week or week after next. But remember that it's the article that gets charged. So it'll be a violation of Article 10. And then the standards of practice embellish what those articles mean. And so Article 10, Standard of Practice 10.5 now reads, as of November 13th of last year, realtors must not use harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial, some little typo there, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Again, it flows from the Article 10 duty to the public to treat everyone equally. And so there's been some controversy, because they didn't change the language of Article 10. Can we still charge Article 10 even though it doesn't talk about hate speech and all the rest? And NAR says, yes, you can. That might get challenged down the road. I don't know. Lawyers look at stuff like that, and somebody might someday challenge that. But for your purposes, you are to assume that a violation of 10.5 is in fact a violation of Article 10. I also want to point out that last year, if you recall, we talked about it at your training last year, they actually changed Article 3. And they added Standard of Practice 3.11. And what 3.11 says is, look, if you discriminate based on one of those characteristics against another real estate professional because of their color or race or ethnicity or something like that, that is a violation of your duty to cooperate. In other words, if I'm working with a realtor who happens to say be gay, and I don't like that, and I then start not cooperating with them, I don't show them open up the house properly, or I don't provide information properly, that is a violation of Article 3. That would also probably bleed in to a violation of Article 10 for grievance when you're looking at these complaints. And I would propose, and a question to you guys, is this also a violation of Article 1, which is a fiduciary duty that you owe to your clients? Why? Well, because I didn't list my property with you because I happen to like you, although I probably do. I listed my property with you because I want all offers that will come in that will meet my criteria. And by you discriminating and eliminating a group of people, are you violating your duties to me as your client, as well as duties that you would have to cooperate with other real estate professionals? So that's going to be a topic we'll have for conversation down the road, or today. That's up to you. And we'll talk about that down the road. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So again, I want to make sure you guys are clear. It can be verbal or it can be written. It can be something you say to somebody. Obviously, that's going to require some strong hearing, some strong evidentiary proof, because if I'm arguing with you and there's no other witnesses, it's kind of a he said, she said. But it all clearly it applies to anything written, anything that's been put on YouTube, for example, anything that's been put on any social media. It was made very clear that social media is included in this conversation. It again only covers the 9 classes, not the 22 that we have in California. And so those other categories are not applicable. Age, for example, we have an age category in California that does not exist at the national level. It must be hateful. And this is the one thing that I really want to dig into today. This isn't just about offensive speech. We've gotten to the point now in some quarters where if I offend you by what I say, that could be a problem. Well, that's too bad. You know, you're going to have to grow a little bit thicker skin. But if what I say to you is related particularly to the color of your skin, or your sexual preference, or your gender identification, and I say it to you in a manner that's offensive to an objective person, I'm not really sure who that is anymore, but a person who can be objective and say that basically is going to be you guys for all intents and purposes at your 3 associations. So again, we're going to have to be really clear that just because I've offended you or insulted you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's risen to the level that we're talking about here. When I was talking to, over the last couple of months, to the lawyers at NAR, some of whom help prepare some of the stuff that are out there, you get the real clear sense that they're after this really offensive stuff, this really hateful stuff, not just something that's offensive. So we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper later, because people get offended all the time nowadays. I mean, we become I don't even want to say this, but it seems to me as an older person, we've become somewhat humorless. We can't tell jokes anymore. Everybody's offended. I taught a sexual harassment class about a week ago to one of the real estate offices that we represent. And, it's certainly not what I thought it would have been 30 years ago, but we've got to be really cautious about that kind of stuff now. But keep in mind that if you're found guilty, or if you find someone guilty, it's going to be reported to the Department of Real Estate. And when I talked to Carlo at DRE, who heads up the investigation unit, he made it clear that, look, if it's something that takes place that's not related to real estate, they can't act, because in California, their jurisdiction is limited to real estate related activities by real estate licensees. So the real estate licensee part is okay, but it's not real estate related. But what he did say, that they're not going to act, but what he did say is that the board and or they can also report it to other agencies, such as the Department of Fair Housing. So say I'm a property manager and I engage in non-real estate related discrimination. I may get reported to the Department of Fair Housing, and then they may conduct an investigation to look into my practices in terms of how I rent, how I handle tenants, how I screen, and all of that. So again, there's a lot more here that meets the eye. So let's move on to the next slide, please. I just want to briefly touch on a couple of things, because I get a lot of phone calls, and I just want to remind you guys that CAR has been really good about being at the forefront of this. And so just a couple of reminders for you guys, and then as we reach out to the membership and so forth, that CAR came up with that new Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. It's a part of the package that you get with all of your contracts and a number of other documents. And I've been a little, not with you guys, because I know you guys do your due diligence and your homework, but how many people have not read that? It's 2 pages. Come on, kids. And so urge people to read that. It's got some great tips on best practices. It talks about things like the buyer letters, also known as the love letters, and the concerns that both CAR and NAR have regarding those letters. Although that's not a hate speech issue, usually it's just the opposite. It can lead to some fair housing concerns. CAR has hired a vice president for diversity purposes and programs, and we're going to be inviting her to participate in some upcoming programs. She's helping develop some programs. She's helping develop some plans for future policies at CAR. So there's going to be a lot more. This is the first step on a new road in a lot of ways. And so what we're talking about today is really at the gate of what's going to probably be taking place over the next period of time. And then CAR is supporting legislation that will require, as part of your annual or semi-annual or whatever you guys do, that we train, or that that realtors, in order to re-up your licenses and get a license, would be required to take implicit or implied bias training. I did that. It was kind of interesting. NAR, I'm going to talk about in a second, has some implicit bias training, and it was eye-opening for me. You know, I don't consider myself a prejudiced person, but we all say that. We all say, I'm not a racist, I'm not a sexist, I'm not a homophobe, whatever that means. I'm not one of those people. But then when we start looking not necessarily at our objective outlook on life, but maybe our subjective thought process, we realize, you know what, I do have some issues I got to work on. So that's going to probably be passed, I suspect, and you'll hear about that sometime this year from your dads and or from me or the board itself. So let's move on. NAR is doing, skip one, I'm sorry. NAR is doing a lot more than just creating these new rules. They have expanded their website and education. They've hired a gentleman by the name of Brian Green, and I've done a program with Brian. He's scary smart. He was Harvard grad, used to be the #2 man at HUD, and he and I and Brandon Butler from the Department of Fair Housing did a program for one of the boards, and we're going to do another one coming up. And he's been working with his department to create videos and all kinds of fair housing education. So go onto the NAR site if you want to explore some of this stuff. There's a 52-minute video on implied bias. I highly recommend that you take a look at it. You know, and it doesn't matter what your gender, what your sexual orientation is, what your race is. We all have biases of one sort or another against certain groups of people. And it's interesting to hear the perspective of those people. One of the things I want to point out to you, and I was talking to the NAR attorneys yesterday, is that this is just beginning. And so what they're doing is they're going to create a data bank. And as issues come to them, as issues come to us, we're going to let them know about different kinds of cases, because you guys have available to you, Lori and Linda can provide hearing officers with case interpretations. Well, we don't have too many right now, but they're going to be working on dozens and dozens of interpretations of basically very upscale hypotheticals and other types of ongoing education to get you guys, as we move forward with, is that a violation? Is that not a violation? The committees at NAR are going to be working with the local associations and the state associations to create case interpretations, so that as we move forward, some of these wild questions won't be quite as wild. So that's going to be happening starting now, and they're working on them now. I can't share it with anybody because I was asked not to, but they actually are creating standardized responses to the emails they're getting. They get a lot of questions, obviously, about religious questions. They get a lot of questions about political points of view. So they're actually creating some standardized responses of their positions, and then, of course, modifying those standardized positions. And so that if somebody sends in a letter to them, they have talking points that make sense to people. And as we move forward, and as those talking points become more defined, we'll start sharing them with you. So there's a lot going on that other than this what we're talking about today. So let's move on to the next slide, please. A couple of clarifications, because this was an unusual act. Number one, it took effect on November the 13th, 2020. So as of November the 13th, if you post and or say and or write something that is hateful, a slur, an epithet, it's actionable. If it occurred on November the 12th or before, it is not retroactive. Therefore, those of you that did something that you probably shouldn't do, and that should be none of you because you're the cream of the crop, but if you see or know somebody that did something before November the 13th, you're good. However, they've also made it clear that if you repost, so let's say you said something in July, okay, and it rose to the level of hate or something along those lines, you're okay for now. Maybe there's another violation, but for now you're okay. But if you repost it, or if I go on and I comment on it in an approving sort of way, that could be actionable. So I want you guys to understand November 13th is a very important day. Obviously, we were going to be looking at that from the 180-day point of view because it still applies. We'll get into that in a second. I've been getting a lot of calls and had conversations with a lot of lawyers and a lot of normal people about, wait a minute, is NAR impacting my free speech rights? Yeah, they are. It's okay. Why? Because under the Constitution, which is a document some of you might recall, there is a federal free speech standard, and it's in Article 1 of the Bill of Rights. It says that the Congress shall pass no law. Congress shall pass no law abridging the freedom of speech, religion, and association. We're seeing religion and association on a constant basis being litigated. I know that the senior partner at this law firm has been all over the state litigating the issue of the shutdowns. And so there's a lot of controversy. But the fact is that NAR is not Congress. Also, we've seen, our governor has shut down churches and has done this and has done that. And that's actionable, that's questionable. But Article 14 of the standard of the Bill of Rights expanded free speech limitations to the states when they expanded equal opportunity, equal protection, and all of the rest of that. So what does that mean? This isn't a constitutional law class, my favorite class in law school. This is a program about hate speech, but I want you to understand that in order for there to be a violation of your free speech rights, there must be some state action. And NAR has taken the position, they are a trade association that you don't have to join, although that's an argument that's going to probably be taken up at some point in time, but that because they're a trade association, they can restrict through their governing documents, including the Code of Ethics, they can restrict your free speech rights. And it's limited, obviously, and they're not going to go crazy about it. And they're trying to, figure out how the boundaries are going to work on this one. But even under state and federal free speech, there's limitations, right? You can't walk into the theater and scream fire or do certain things with your speech that create panic or create issues, right? You can't walk in to the Capitol and start destroying property, screaming, whatever you're going to scream, or well, I've been told to stay away from political points of view, so I'm going to stop there because there were lots of things that happened during the year that we all were questioning. But you can't do that, right? Because the speech also connects to some behavior you're engaging in, and the behavior is what has caused the problem. So even under federal and state law, there are restrictions on free speech. And then again, if you engage in hate speech, even if it's protected under federal and state law, the fact is, if you connect that to some form of a crime against a person of color or against a gay person or something like that, it can be used as evidence of the fact that you had engaged in a hate crime. And so there are even limitations at the federal and state level, but it is not a free speech issue. That is absolutely clear as a matter of law. Let's move on to the next slide, Jake. Thanks. So couple of important procedures to remember, and I have probably forgotten some of them because I don't hold a candle to Lori or Linda when it comes to issues relating to the procedures. I think I'm pretty good at it, so I want to cover a couple of things, and then I want to put something before all three boards of directors that are in attendance today. Number one, the processes have not changed. So for grievance, you're still going to look at a complaint and you're going to say to yourself, if the facts are true, has a violation of Article 10 occurred? And you're going to assume that they're true because you don't weigh the merits of the case. We've talked about that. So in some areas, we could be processing what are clearly vendettas, where somebody says something in a complaint because we're not really investigating. We don't know that all they're really trying to do is to harm somebody. But keep in mind this, that if it is established later on that the person misused the procedures just to get at somebody, well, isn't that an Article 14 violation? Isn't that a violation of a member duty? So as we move forward, there's going to be checks and balances that you guys are going to be able to come up with. Why? Because we're going to need to figure out, what are these limitations on the vendettas and things like that. Now, there's an issue that's not in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to present it now because Linda brought it up this morning to me, and it's a great issue. What about anonymous complaints? Right now, I'm sorry, we did manage to squeeze it in. I apologize. But here's the issue. The board of directors has to decide whether or not they're going to allow anonymous complaints. I'm talking to Linda this morning. I haven't had a chance to talk to Lori about this yet. I believe that a motion would be appropriate to say one of two things, and it's really going to be up to the board. We're not going to accept any anonymous complaints. I think that's a mistake, because I'm going to tell you about a video that I saw yesterday where a person came on in a video and he made a comment that if anyone came into his neighborhood, this was based on those Antifa BLM situations that came up last year, and he used the N-word, and he was a realtor from I think it's Illinois, and he was holding up a $1,200 rifle. I don't know what kind it is because I don't have a gun, but he had a $1,200 rifle because he made a point that he paid $1,200 for it, and that he would shoot any N person who came into his neighborhood. Well, he wasn't addressing that to a specific person, but it was pretty clearly hateful. And this is a realtor. This was a realtor who did this. So the question is, how do we deal with, if I see that video, which he posted proudly, can I report that video to the grievance committee, and will the grievance committee act without having a specific person file the complaint? So the board's going to have to make that call. We'll put it, assuming that either Connie or Laura or Phil are okay with it. I'd like to put that on the agenda for an upcoming discussion, and the boards will decide how they're going to deal with anonymous complaints. But Linda made a great point to me this morning that we really need to have consistency. The board will decide what that consistency looks like, but I don't want it to be helter skelter. I think that would create some due process issues where, well, we're going to let Jake off the hook because we like Jake because he knows how to handle computers, but we don't like Linda because whatever, right? We can't do that. We've got to have one rule that applies to everybody. It includes social events. It includes social media and all non-real estate personal interactions. So we're not going to worry. I'm going to talk to you about a video I saw yesterday, and I'll be happy to send you a link to those videos if you want to actually see them. They're pretty funny and very, well, not funny, but tragic actually would be a better way to say it. But this person was basically doing something, taking a walk. I'm not really sure. It's not clear from what I saw, but he, two African-American young males were walking down the street, and he confronted them, asked them what they were doing in his neighborhood. And they basically said, what's it your business? We're were not doing anything wrong, which they did not appear to be doing anything wrong. And he said, well, this is a no N-word zone. And they caught it on tape. So, again, that was totally unrelated to real estate, totally a personal interaction, but absolutely actionable. Again, it could have been filed anonymously. It could have been filed as a complaint by one of the two gentlemen who were a victim. And so that's going to have to be decided by the board. The 180-day rule still applies. So if you say something in November 30th, say, and nobody takes any action till July of next year, you're okay. You're not going to be punished because they did not change the 180-day rule at all. So it's going to be based upon the date of the utterance and all of that. Hearing panel people, I want you to understand that again, your duty is to find clear and convincing evidence. I put Black's Law Dictionary definition up, evidence that the thing is to be proved is highly probable. Now, obviously, most of the time, you're going to have a smoking gun. You're going to have a video. You're going to have an email. You're going to have a social post of some sort. You're going to have whatever you need, and that's going to be that. Maybe the person's going to come in and explain it was a moment of passion. I know I shouldn't have said it. You're going to have to deal with that on the sanctioning side. But when it's a he said, she said kind of thing, Jake and I are in here by ourselves and camera goes off and I can't imagine what I would rant at him about, but I rant at him about something. And then he says, I said that. And I say, I never said that. There's nobody that's witnessing it. You're going to have to look at other evidence at the hearing level to determine credibility, body language, all those kinds of things that would render a just and equitable decision. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Again, this is where Lori and Linda are so invaluable because not every board has a Lori or a Linda. I'm finding that out as my training regimen goes to places that I've never been before. But you guys have the two of them to help and or draft your findings because they're going to have to be very carefully crafted because the board of directors is going to have to know very clearly, are we off? Oh, there we go. Thank God Jake's here. He's a godsend because something bad just happened on my end. I don't know if it happened on yours. I panic whenever anything of a technical nature goes wrong. Anyway, so you're going to have to really, really, really carefully craft the findings. Lori and Linda have training available. We're going to talk a little bit about it at the professional standards training in a couple of weeks. And then the sanctions. This is going to be tough because if somebody says something, you're going to have to check your own personal feelings about these things and deal on a fair, equal, and consistent level. If you are someone who has issues with certain persons in certain categories because of your faith or because of your political issues, but the person did something purposeful and hateful and clearly meant to do it, you're going to have to deal with it. Or if you're a person who happens to be in one of the categories that we're talking about, and again, I think all of us are, but I really, we're talking about certain historically discriminated against people. If you're one of those people and somebody says something, but then comes in and explains that it was a moment of passion, he was dumb to do it, et cetera, you're going to have to look at that. And when you develop the sanctions, you're going to have to be very clear what those guidelines are. And if it's to say my first offense, I've been a realtor for 40 years, I'm in a leadership role and I say something I shouldn't say, and I immediately take it down and I apologize. Pardon me, but I clearly said something hateful or something that you believe falls within the category. You're going to have to take that into consideration as well. Should I know better, et cetera? All the things you do now, but in a far different environment. We cannot issue citations for any of this. So the MLS, if something is put on the MLS, they're going to have to report it directly to the board because citations cannot be issued. Ethics citations cannot be issued. There's no mediation. There's not going to be any any ombudsman interchange. It's going to be straight to grievance. And of course, ethics advocates are allowed, but only in the manner that they're currently allowed. So again, what's going to happen? If you're a supervisor, if you're a broker, you're going to have to be aware of the fact that there are issues that impact you. You're going to need to train. You're going to need to step in. And again, a couple of things on that. Number one, Department of Real Estate Regulation 2725, which is the broker supervision regulation. Under subsection F says that brokers are required to supervise and educate agents on issues relating to federal and state discrimination. That's why when we host these symposiums, when Connie brings in somebody like a Brandon Butler, or Laura and Phil bring in somebody like a Brian Green, you should get your people to watch that stuff. Because again, that can go to show that, you're doing what you can. If it's an issue that relates in some way to advertising and the words that are chosen or something like that, you have a duty to supervise. So keep in mind that you're not off the hook. And when we talk to the people for training, we're going to talk about, we talked last year about how to bring in a supervisor. So Connie just asked a great question about staff and Facebook posts that may be questionable. Again, I don't know if it's staff that's posting it or staff that's seeing it. If it's staff that's posting it, well, staff are not members of the association, so we don't have jurisdiction over them. Obviously, you as an employer are going to need to deal with them and train and all that. If it's something they see that they believe is something that a member is doing, then yeah, they should report it to Linda at Southwest, or Lori at Tri-Counties and Pacific West, and deal with it. That was a great question. But again, remember, we have limited jurisdiction. We only have jurisdiction over Realtor members. And so from that standpoint, we can only deal with members that are Realtors. If something comes in from the multiple listing service, we can deal with them on the MLS side. And of course, Linda and Lori, Linda wrote up the matrix that we use, and we're going to take a look at that as well. So there's a lot that we still don't know how we're going to deal with, but we're going to deal with it the best way that we can. And every day we're going to have not every day, but we're going to have lots of questions, because I think there's going to be a really large gray area here. And then of course, we're going to report real estate related conduct to the Department of Real Estate. And now that person's license is on the line, just as it would be if we reported a fraud or a misrepresentation. So moving on to the next slide, please. So how are we going to turn? First thing you're going to have to do, there's a process. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this now and probably expand on it as the year goes on, as things become clear to all of us. First thing you're going to ask yourself, has hate speech actually occurred? Is it just an offensive remark about a person's weight or about their hair, about something like that? Or is it really a hate speech or an epithet or a slur, or is it meant to harass? Okay, that's the first question. Then the second question, has hate speech occurred against one of the categories or a characteristic of the category? Brian Butler, who's the attorney at Department of Fair Housing, does a great job of analyzing. Look, if I'm looking at an application for a house and I want to rent it, right? Am I being turned down because my credit score isn't any good, or because I have some other problem that is objectively verifiable that has nothing to do with the fact that I might be African American or Hispanic or gay or anything like that? Or is the fact that I'm being treated differently evidence that that the characteristic is being brought into question? And that's going to be a tough analysis, and really, for the purposes of grievance, probably not as deep a dive as is going to have to be done at the hearing level, because you're going to need to hear evidence, because probably the person that's coming in as a respondent is going to say, nothing to do with their race, had nothing to do with their gender. We had a case some time ago in one of the boards where the property manager was showing property to an African American couple. They brought some friends with them. The friends sat out on the front and started to get really rowdy and play music and yelling and doing all kinds of things that objectively anyone would say, really not proper behavior. The realtor then said, I'm not going to rent to, quote, you people. And so it went to a hearing, and the you people was the issue. What did she mean by that? She meant specifically, I'm not renting to the two of you because I don't want to put my client in that position. You can argue that the panel was right or wrong, but they believed in her. She had provided evidence that she was not, that she had no history of racism or anything like that. But those are going to be kind of interesting kinds of cases, I think. Then, of course, is the remark, the writing, or the posting based on one of the 9 protected categories? And is it offensive to the reasonable person? And guess who that is? When I was in law school, my civil procedure professor was a justice on the Court of Appeals, and I went to him after class one day. Back then, we used the reasonable man test. That's changed to the reasonable person test, right? As we've expanded our viewpoint. And I asked him, so who is the reasonable man? And he said, whoever the jury thinks it is, right? In other words, what's the evidence and what does the jury believe the evidence shows? Well, guess what? That's you. You're the reasonable person in this context. Is this something that offends you as a reasonable person, unrelated to the passions and all the other issues? Is this something that was said that is hateful, that is connected to a characteristics of the class, and that I find to be hateful, I find to be racially inappropriate or inappropriate based on sexual orientation? And that's really it. You're the reasonable person. And so that's a big burden for you guys to carry, but it always has been. And that's why we pick the best. It does not have to be real estate related. We've already covered that many times, but that's the change. Okay, if you could move on to the next slide, please. So I was a history major, so I like to have terms defined. I'm a lawyer. We're not that smart. We look at the dictionary. And so I've given you, and I want to thank Brian Polinsky from CAR, because he sent out these definitions, but they're taken primarily from Webster's dictionary, right? So there are probably other definitions. Actually, I think it's incorrect. I think it's now called Merriam's Webster's Dictionary, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm old and therefore I still believe it's Webster's Dictionary, right? And every year they eliminate words and they add new words. So here's the current definition of the different things we're talking about. Speech, hate speech, speech that is intended. Wow, that's a really big issue. I intend to insult, offend, or intimidate a person because of some trait. Oh, another typo, that's 2. Because of race, religion, sexual orientation. In other words, one of the 9 categories. I have intended to insult, offend, or intimidate you because of your race, because of your religious belief, because of your sexual orientation, or your familial status, or your disability, which, by the way, is the #1 claim at the Department of Fair Housing. What's an epithet? It is a characterizing word or phrase accompanying or occurring in place of the name of a person or thing. Basically a disparaging or abusive word or phrase, right? So instead of using normal words, I characterize you. And this is where it gets a little weird, because I'm not sure how now I'm trying to be politically correct, but there are so many epithets out there, words that we use to describe people that have absolutely nothing to do with an appropriate characteristic, right? Something to do with their sexual orientation, the historic words that we've used in the past. So, you're this or you're that, or words that came from the Italian for someone who's gay, but they shortened it to certain other words. Slurs. I'm part of me wants to do what I can't do during sexual harassment, and just say it. But you guys are thinking it yourself. You know what I'm talking about. Slurs. What is a slur? By definition, a slur is an insulting or disparaging remark or innuendo. It is shaming, but it is shaming or degrading a person to stain them, to stigmatize them, again, based on one of the criteria. So calling me a fat guy, while it certainly hurts my feelings, has nothing to do with my race or my ethnicity, although I could argue that. It has nothing to do with any of the protected categories. But if I said something about, okay, where do gender-based pronouns, I'm going to get to that. Thank you for, that's a great, you're anticipating my comments, Paul. That's a great question. By the way, I can't see your questions, so every now and then we'll put it up and I'll see it. So thanks a lot, Jake. So race. Any one of the groups that, okay, so those are the three issues: hate speech, epithet, slur. Don't forget also harassing speech. We don't have a Merriman definition for that, so we're going to have to work on that as we move down the road. Race, any one of the groups that humans are often divided into based on physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry, right? So that's the definition of a race. Color, skin pigmentation. That's all that it is, skin pigmentation. Other than that, and especially darker than what is considered characteristics of people typically defined as white. Okay, I know again, it's skin pigmentation. I thought we'd be done with that by now, but apparently that's still an issue for some people. Moving on to the next slide. Religion. Personal set of institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices, right? I call myself a Christian. Well, that's not good enough for some people, so we've got to make up denominations. I'm a Protestant, I'm a Catholic, I'm Jewish, or I'm Muslim, or I'm an atheist, or I'm an agnostic, right? It's my personal religious belief, but I'm discriminating against you because you're a Hindu, or because you're a Muslim, or because you're a Christian, right? Sex, either of the two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and that are distinguished respectively as male, female, or male, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. Wow, that was sure a nice way of saying things, wasn't it? There are two genders, male and female. There are many other choices. That gets into orientation and gender identity, right? Handicap. By far the single most common form of discrimination, not necessarily hate speech discrimination. I think that goes to race and color and sexual orientation, but handicap is considered something to be protected and can be found in discrimination, even if not hate speech. And that's a disadvantage that makes achievement unusually difficult because of a physical disability. So again, it is a physical disability. According to Department of Fair Housing, approximately 18% of the public has a form of disability, right? It could be sight, it could be hearing, it could be mobility issues, it could be the way you speak, the stuttering or something along those lines. And again, we have the Americans with Disability Act. Sexual orientation, a person's identity in relation to gender or genders to which they are sexually attracted. The fact of being heterosexual, homosexual, and there are now, I can't even begin to count the number of categories, right? I just renewed my bar membership, and for the first time I was sent an application, and the gal that handles that for us buzzed me and said, what should I put? I said, male. She said, no, I believe there were 9 choices on the state bar application, and I had to pick. Right? It's nothing to do with my gender. It had to do with my orientation, right? Gender identity, a person's internal sense of being a male, a female, some combination of male and female, neither male nor female, or the totality and physical and behavioral traits that are designated by culture as masculine or feminine. People that are transgender, transsexual, bisexual, identify myself as, what was the one that I saw? I don't remember, but it had to do with, I was whatever I wanted to be on that given day, right? And you may not like it, you may laugh at it, you may not approve of it, you may have religious issues relating to it, but the reality is, under both federal and especially under California law, and now under NAR, those people are protected from harassment, hate speech, discrimination, and all of the rest of it. Moving on to the next slide, please. Then we have the Fair Housing Act, which covers some other things. Familial status, that covers families with children under the age of 18, pregnant persons, and any person in the process of securing legal custody of a minor child, including adoptive or foster parents. So discrimination at the Article 10 level, or hate speech or other forms of speech at the Article 10 SOP 10.5 status is that's family status. And again, that is the second at the Fair Housing Department in California. That is the second most cited grounds for discrimination. Number one being disability. Race is number three. It's not in the top two. Then we have national origin. It's your birthplace, ethnicity, ancestry, culture, language. National origin includes a region within a country, or it can include a region that spans multiple countries, right? Gypsies in multiple areas, or someone from a particular, someone who's a Tennessean or a Southerner or a Yankee, right? Those are areas. We've all taken the ancestry test, right? Whether it's Forever, whatever that one is called, or Ancestry, this or that. I don't remember the one I took. I sent in a swab and found out I'm Italian. Gee, who knew? Giardinelli, right? But the reality is that I'm not just Italian. I'm 66% Italian. I'm also other things here. When I look at that, I realize, my God, 33% of me could be in one of these areas. So again, it is what it is. There's also words that we use. I didn't put them up. I think next time I do this and rethinking, probably going to add some other definitions. My son-in-law and I were talking about racism and how common it is that we be called that people are called racist or homophobes. So we looked up those terms. There's actually definitions for racist, and some of it could be positive. Some of it could be positive because you're talking about the qualities of certain races that seem to be commonplace. But again, that could be a racist remark. But we've sort of taken certain words and made them negative, right? If you're discriminating, well, if I'm a discriminating wine connoisseur, that's not a bad thing. If I'm a discriminating person based on race, that is a bad thing. So again, certain words don't have meanings the same all the time. Next slide, please. So down the road this year, I told the directors a couple of years ago that I thought fair housing issues were emerging and going to become in California. And I was wrong, because it's not just California, but nationally, we've got all sorts of issues. Remember, again, California Fair Housing Guidelines have over 20 protected categories. Issues relating to fair housing and discrimination in advertising, implied bias issues, things that you don't even realize, things you were raised with, things that your parents told you were bad, things that your friends told you were bad, just cultural kinds of things. We're seeing appraisal issues, our properties being appraised based on their market value. These are issues for another day. We're going to be talking over the course of time. We're going to have a new president in a couple of weeks, and I suspect he's going to be changing a lot of what the current president did in terms of state initiative or federal initiatives. And I suspect that some of that's going to be good, and some of us may not like. I saw a really cool study that I want to bring to people's attention. They did a name discrimination. Certain words are related to certain types of ethnicities, right? Whereas other words are considered more Caucasian types. And so they're showing that applications and things that relate to your name can lead to discrimination all by itself. Insurance issues, right? well, historically, the cost of insurance in certain areas based on predominant race has been significantly higher, but also will insurance companies cover issues relating to discrimination, civil claims, and the like? The associations are going to be changing what we call their core standards and are going to be required to provide education like this. And then, of course, what's future training going to look like? There's so much more. We're going to be doing programs on the love letters, where a seller gets a letter from a buyer that contains fair housing issues. Ed Zorn, who's the CRMLS attorney, has spoken at length about that topic, and we're going to have him and Jeff Smetana speak on that topic again, because these are important issues relating to those kinds of questions. So just stuff is coming up left and right. Okay, moving on. So I got done quicker than I thought. I gave myself 2 hours, and I don't know how we're going to do this. Is this the last slide? I think it is the last. Well, why don't I just look at mine? So this is where we're making it up as we go, kids. And so I'm going to go onto the screen without the slide, and we may be getting out of here quicker than I thought, which is certainly okay. But I want to know what other questions we might have pending, and then I want to ask a couple of questions that I talked to some of my counterparts about. But let's see, what are you called if you have no sexual identity? Asexual. That's the term. Asexual. There are actually, if you watch the movie Godzilla, that monster was asexual, right? She was not a he, she, and she was not a he, but she was able to reproduce asexually. This video makes me look skinny. Michael, you're in my will. Thank you. Where do gender-based pronouns fall within these categories? That's a great question. That has to do with something at the very bottom of this last slide, misgendering. In California, we have a law. If you've been reading the news, you know that Ms. Pelosi at the House of Representatives have created rules that talk about they're no longer at the congressional level, at least in the House, going to use words like she, he, husband, wife. It's not she, he, but husband, wife, male nouns. They're going to use non-descriptive pronouns. In California, we have that basic issue. Where if someone says, I don't want to be referred to as in a male or female, you're going to have to use gender neutral pronouns. Now, that's a state action. Is that free speech? I don't know. I don't know if there's a case pending. That's not an area that I practice in. But clearly we're going to, and I don't know how that's going to play out, Paul. Paul DeSimone asked the question. It's a great question. I don't know how that's going to play out. I'm not really sure how that's going to look to you guys, right? Where let's say Jake sends me a letter and I reply to that letter in using typical common words that would be relating to his maleness. And he writes me back and says, I prefer that you not do that. I don't want to define myself as a male. I consider myself transgender, or whatever the term was. I don't. There's a term for when I'm all sexes to all people and no sex to anyone. I'm genderless, and so and I write back to him and I say, "You fool! What are you talking about?" And I make some hateful, insulting remarks that may come up. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. If I don't know how that's going to come up, but it's sure going to be interesting, isn't it? There's a question that Paul asked here. My faith says that the marriage is between a man and a woman. I understand that, and I for a long time felt that way, and my religion tells me to still feel that way. However, here's the thing with that's your faith. We're not allowed, nor should we, and Congress is not allowed to impose a religious standard on us, right? I'm Christian. I believe what the Bible says to be true, but I'm also a conservative. And how do I then say that the government should tell me who I can love and marry if I'm conservative, because I'm using the government to impose something that is based on my moral standard? That's my personal belief. Linda told me not to get into that today, but we can get into those kinds of conversations. I have a hypothetical on that very first thing. My question is this. So I'm a Bible study teacher, and I teach Bible study at a church that actually does podcasts of some of the Bible studies. Because of the pandemic, people don't want to actually go to the church and sit in a room with other people. And we get into the same conversation about a man and a woman, and I make comments about the fact that I believe religion, that I believe that it's between a man and a woman. And I say some things that could be construed as hateful about homosexuality or gay marriage. Now, I'm also a realtor, and that gets posted. Is that going to be something you guys are going to be concerned about? Are there going to be issues that come up in that arena? Are we going to have those kinds of conversations? I don't know. That's going to be kind of interesting. What about points of view? I mean, all of us saw what happened yesterday in Washington. Some of us thought it was awful. Some of us also thought what happened in Portland and Seattle were awful. Some people only thought what happened in Portland and Seattle were awful and not what happened yesterday. Some people thought what happened yesterday in Washington was awful, but what happened in Portland or Seattle was great. I mean, we all have different points of view. And the question then becomes, what if I espouse a point of view that I consider to be a political opinion, but someone else considers to be hate speech, right? I mean, we've seen the conversations. We can't ignore what's going on out in the world, right? We're realtors, you're judging those kinds of activities. But if I create a political opinion, what are you guys going to do with that? What about, will there be a double standard in some areas? You know, we have areas where I live is pretty conservative. And so we might have a point of view that might be different than somebody else. And what we need to do is raise it to the level that NAR is talking about, where everyone is judged and talked about and talked to equally, regardless of a characteristic that we might not have or probably don't have any control over. I'm Italian because that's where my grandfather came from. You know, Jake is, I don't know what you are, Jake, but you know, because that's where your ancestors, you had no control over where your ancestors came from. I had no control over the color of my skin or my race. There's arguments about whether I have control of my sexual identity. Maybe I was born with autism. I have no control over that, right? But yet I get discriminated against, and that's going to be the topic for conversation. I have two questions up here about the 180-day rule. Normally, Dawn, it's going to be if it's something in writing or something that's said to you, it's going to be 180 days from that day, right? That's a long period of time. If it offended you that much, I would think you would act fairly quickly. So I don't think we're going to see that issue. But what if it's something you didn't become aware of? Well, you know, I don't know. It's going to be up to that's where we get into issues at both the grievance level. We talk about this all the time. You know, we've had conversations about issues that crop up where it's discovered late. By who? How? It's basically when you knew or should have known. So that's going to be possibly an issue where I know with Paul and some of the others, we've had issues where we've had to have pre-hearings and take in evidence of when that should have discovered takes place. We'll probably have to do that in some circumstances. So those are going to be things that will crop up as we move forward. I don't know the answer to that question because it's going to be a case by case. It's a great question, Dawn, but it's going to be a case by case. And again, Dawn also posed if someone posted an inappropriate, it's not it. Okay, let me correct that. I'm glad you did it that way, Dawn, because I want to clear up something. It is not about inappropriate comments. My wife tells me I'm inappropriate probably twice a day. Linda's been telling me that for 33 years, at least twice a day. That's not the criteria. It's hateful. It's offensive to a reasonable person. It is a slur as defined by the word. So again, be careful of that. I understand. I'm glad you did that. But so let's use the word, if someone posted a hateful comment 180 days before the new rule went into effect, but someone reposted. Again, the date is November 13th. Unlike most situations that would have gone into effect on January the 1st, November 13th is your starting date. If I posted it 180 days ago or 200 days ago or one day before November 13th, it's irrelevant. It's not actionable. However, if I repost it, let's say, Dawn, I put something in generally about race, okay? And then you repost it on November 14th, and you say, this guy has it together. That's the best thing I've ever seen. I agree completely that all Black people or all gay people should be this or that, whatever it is, whatever you guys decide is hateful. At that juncture, that starts the clock running against you. If I repost it myself, then it starts from the day I repost myself. So if you're dumb enough, you got away with it on November the 12th and sooner. If you repost it on November 13th, then you're free game, and then grievance will take it up and decide if it's hateful or harassing or one of the criteria, and then move it forward. I saw a definition from Mary. Oh, slide number 8, define objective person. I can't. You're the objective person. So if it's the grievance committee, it is whatever you decide is the criteria. And what I'm trying to say is, look, guys, let's be consistent with this. And as Lori and Linda see cases, and we're not going to get that many. I think Lori has one I can't comment on because it's a pending matter. We've gotten one. NAR has gotten a bunch because, again, that's national. But as we get cases, we'll be able to start defining, the parameters. Right now, it's going to be a case-by-case analysis most of the time. Now, I told you about the 2 videos I saw yesterday. I don't think anyone would argue that either of those 2 videos was not hateful. One, neither of them were real estate related. Both of them had to do, one was the fellow who stopped the 2 Black men from walking down the street simply because they were Black, telling them that this is a no end zone. And that was pretty blatant. The other one, the guy held up a rifle and said, please come into my area, and use the N word because, I bought this rifle for a specific purpose. Again, those kinds of things probably not going to be that difficult for you. But when it gets to being something dealing with maybe a religious opinion or a political viewpoint, or is it a double standard? He said it, he gets away with it. She said it, she doesn't. Are we going to see reverse harassment where, certain areas are going to be very, very, no matter what you say about a certain group of people, it's going to be prejudicial, versus in another area where no matter what you say, it's not going to be prejudicial. Okay, Ruben, how does gender identity or any other class, how does gender identity or any other class come into play in a real estate transaction? Are there fields in any real estate forms that require applicants to provide this information? I'm not a realtor, so they're trying to do away with most of the forms that deal with that kind of stuff and be gender neutral. Perhaps I'm naive, but aren't we simply looking to see which offer or application is the best? That's the criteria, Ruben. That you hit it on the head. I don't know if anybody can see this question go into the, I guess it's the question answers you can, but here's the criteria is, and again, I'm not the final arbiter of all this. I'm trying to struggle with this myself. That's why I'm watching videos and reading and doing those things. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but look, if I get an application to rent an apartment or to buy or I get an offer from Jake and his wife, right? And I see his name isn't Jake, it's Keisha, or that I see something that, or I meet them, or they attach a picture which to a love letter or something like that, and suddenly it's because of that color, because of that identification. I think that's the issue. If I look at Jake's application to buy or rent, and I'm looking at it from the standpoint of his credit score, or the fact that he's pre-approved for the loan, or any of the objectively verifiable criteria that have nothing to do with these 9 categories, I'm good to go. And the fact that if Jake happens to be gay, or if Jake happens to be black, or in one of the other categories is irrelevant. It's the fact that he can't qualify or he does qualify. I think that's when you get out of, you get into the right area. And that's what you guys are going to be judging, right? That's what I've had numerous conversations with Stephanie and Barbara about these love letters and legitimate concerns about how they could crop up even in an implied way. So I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations. And again, let's go back to the goal. What's the purpose of all this? To raise the bar so that we don't end up with another Long Island situation, or we don't end up with a denigration of the industry as a whole. Simply, we are dealing with, we represent buyers and sellers, right, who are looking for, I'm selling my house, and I had a very interested buyer come in yesterday, and I told him that I'm really excited about the prospect of selling my house to him. You want to know why? Because he's a contractor, and I know he'll take care of a house I've lived in and built 30 years ago. And we had great conversations about things he might want to do to upgrade the house. And I'm thinking to myself, that's the kind of guy. It wasn't because he was black. It wasn't because of any other aspect of who he was. It was his trade. That's who he was. And that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. But what if he would have come in and been in something in one of the categories? And that's, I'm going, oh my God, I certainly don't want to sell to those people because there's nobody like him in the neighborhood, right? Then you start getting into some issues that are problematic. And this is going to take a long time to, I mean, we've been dealing with this for hundreds of years in some areas. We're not going to get over this overnight. We're going to hopefully raise the bar slowly but surely. Maybe some people will no longer be realtors. You know, is that a problem? I don't know. There's actually a definition for non-binary, Vanessa. I can send it to you if anybody else has a question, or I can send it to Lori or to Linda and they can put it up. It's actually in the sexual harassment class. It basically has to do with my attitude about who I am as a man or female. And this, again, there's all kinds of political issues and stuff going on out there. Does a failure to use gender neutral pronouns in marketing materials open one up to liability? Probably not. It just depends, again, on how you're doing it. Let me see if I even can that be voiced in a social setting? Paul, I don't know what that refers to, but social settings, yes, it can be. If I'm at a party with you and there are other people present and I say something that is really rises to the level of what we've been talking about today, and deals specifically with a class, and then someone else hears that and reports me, that can happen according to the conversations I've had with NAR. I just saw something from Glenn Hellier. It was probably demeaning to me and actionable. Let me see what he says. Your pink shirt is rather slimming. Well, thank you. It's not pink, it's salmon, my wife told me. I'm colorblind, so I have no idea what color it is, but it looks like it's salmon. But thank you for the slimming comment. In California, that could be considered actionable because in San Francisco, at least, they actually have a category for weight and discriminations. Remember, we have federal, state, and local. So can you touch on the political opinions a bit more, such as if one made comments on yesterday's events in DC about how shameful those actions were, can that be determined as hateful? I don't think so. I think, frankly, it's an objective person would say that all of these actions, whether you're to the right or to the left, whether you're a supporter of the particular political points of view, whether you're a BLM person or a Trump person or a this person or a that person, right? You're an American and you have a right to speak your piece. It's when the actions that took place should be objectively verifiable to all of us. Destruction of someone else's property, tearing down a public business, invading the Capitol, all those kinds of things. I don't think that in and of itself. I think it would be different. Let's say we zeroed in on the BLM activities. I don't know. Maybe that if I said something about the BLM activities, that again, at what point is it political opinion? Because they don't want that to become the criteria where we're attacking each other solely because of our political viewpoints. It's got to be more than that. Denise, NAR has a fair, is it Haven or Heaven webinar that will help answer a lot of these questions. Thank you, Denise. Denise, past president of one of the three boards, one of my personal friends, and a brilliant lady in her own right. And yes, I really urge, particularly you guys, because you guys are the people that are going to judge these cases. You guys are the people at the board level that are going to hear these cases. Go to the NAR site. They've got all kinds of good stuff there, and look at some of it. An observation from Larry covers a huge map of details and possibilities that will afford some challenge in drafting examples for the pro standard plans. Couldn't agree more, Larry. I think that's going to be the challenge, frankly, is going to be, it's not, some of the stuff is clearly not hate speech, simply making a comment that, in my opinion, what happened yesterday or what happened in Portland or what happened in, in terms of the all the rioting that took place at all those places, in terms of whether it's political or not, but just the bare fact that those things occurred is probably an opinion that I'm entitled to have. Or I say to you that, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and he who believe, right? That's a religious position that says basically, if you don't believe that way, you're not going to get to heaven. And, those things are my opinions. They're my religious beliefs. But then over here, we have the guy that wouldn't let people walk down the street simply because of the color of their skin. But I believe that where the action's going to be is what Larry's talking about, that dead center, where it's not necessarily hateful, but it gets kind of close, but it's not, but it's political or religious. And that's where I believe a lot of people have real concern, and how we get into the levels of consistency. And I agree that we're going to, again, NAR is going to come up with case interpretations. We're going to be monitoring. You got the two best administrators in the entire state handling your professional standards. They're going to be looking at this stuff. We're going to be CAR. Brian Polinsky is going to be looking at this stuff. I'm a member of a group at CAR, a risk management group of 12 lawyers, and we're going to be keeping an eye on that stuff. And we're going to try and see how we can narrow the field. Winston asked a great question earlier. You mentioned fraud. How does that tie into our conversation? Because under the prior rule, if I committed if I misrepresented something to the extent, misrepresentation, a fancy word for fraud, right? It's also a fancy word for, when I was a kid, lying, right? I purposefully lie in a manner that costs you money. If that's the case, under the old rule, it said substantial economic harm. If you do it and it's, I commit fraud against a certain class or a certain group, and it can be established that the fraud was perpetrated on someone of color or something like that, then it doesn't have to even be substantial. That's the way I read that. Frankly, all fraud should be reported to the Department of Real Estate, even if it's $10. That's my personal opinion. For people who commit fraud are people who hurt you, because if they lie about that, they're going to lie about something else. And that's frankly part of the argument that's gone into this, is that if I'm a guy that stands on the sidewalk or brandishes an automatic weapon saying I'm going to kill, end people, or I'm not going to allow people to walk freely simply because of the color of their skin, when I start selling real estate, am I the type of person that's going to sell real estate equally to those people? The answer is probably not. And that was sort of the thinking that went into a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. Emojis. I have noticed that emojis come in colors. So I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that, because I'm not an emoji guy. I use them when I'm lazy. A thumbs up if I agree with somebody. And I never, to be honest, the one I use is yellow. I didn't even know they come in color. But let me tell you how somebody got in trouble. As a board I represent, and an emoji went out. The board was trying to get people to read stuff. People weren't reading stuff. And so the staff person, who happened to be a person of color and who was gay. So he fit into the categories, and he just made a bad mistake of judgment. But there's apparently an emoji that's either out there or used to be out there of a black woman who says, "I ain't got time for no reading." And he put it on the article. It was an electronic newsletter. Oh my God, the controversy that arose out of that was unbelievable. Went all the way to, very high sources. So you got to be careful about what you do, because again, I may not consider something like that to be prejudicial, right? But you might. I'm not in your race. I'm not in your gender. I'm not gay, right? But I have a board that half of my board, they're gay, and they're going to look at these things, and they've had friends who have been injured because of their sexual orientation. They've had friends who have been beaten up. I can't relate to that because it's not happened to me. But if we don't want to understand somebody, you got to step into their shoes and say, right? I made a comment to the Southwest people the other day. I'm at an age now where I've been very active and very blessed. I've water skied every day for 25 years. I used to go snow skiing a lot. I've had a very wonderful active life. I can't do those things anymore. And for the first time in my life, I can scuba dive still, because it doesn't take much to do that. So I just jump in the water and get wet. But Larry, you know that. But I can't really do a lot of the things I used to do because of my age. So for the first time in my life, I kind of understand what someone who's been handicapped their whole life has lived their whole life, right? So again, we need to step in other people's shoes and realize, you know what? You're hurting other people when you talk like that. It may not hurt you, or you may not hurt your group, but there are people out there who feel that pain because of the color of their skin, or how they're treated or not treated. I could give you some other stories about some things where I saw what it felt like to be a minority, and how I felt, and things that were implied internally. But I'm not going to right now because Linda told me I shouldn't. Can you talk more about the issue of buyer letters in a second? Does this also fall into place, the new fair housing discrimination laws? Not necessarily, because those laws that's a great question, Robert. Those are much, much broader criteria, right? If I'm Jake, I've been picking on Jake all day because frankly, he's bailing me out here doing a great job. But if I'm let me give you an example. Okay. I'm a person, I'm a black person, I'm an African-American. And I go to my property manager and I say that I'm being harassed by my neighbor, or I'm a female and I go to my property manager and I say I'm being harassed by my neighbor, right? There may be no hate speech involved, but there is a fair housing regulation that says you, as the property manager, owner, landlord, whatever you are, you must deal with that under the fair housing regulations. So those duties are much, much broader than the implications of hate speech or race. So, and then of course, Section 8, again, I don't know. I have a friend of mine who's the happiest camper in the world. He was upset because of the fact that, he can't discriminate based on Section 8 housing any longer because of source of income, which could or could not necessarily flow to race or familial status. But he's the happiest guy in the world now because he has missed a rent payment because he's getting paid, right? So, but the fact is yeah, I could see that come up because I could say something or write something about people that collect Section 8 that could imply race or could imply ethnicity or something like that. A single mom getting Section 8 funding, or a single dad getting Section 8 funding or something like that. The new RPA, Barbara and Linda DeStefano and I, Barbara Betts, Barbara Horan, and Linda DeStefano and I, we're going to have a conversation in a couple of weeks. We don't even know how we're going to teach that class yet, but it's not going to, there's going to be a whole section, obviously, we're going to want to talk about when it comes to fair housing, because again, it's such an integral part now of selling property. And we're going to do a property management class coming up in a couple of weeks. And I have a whole section on fair housing and all of this. So yeah, we're going to be covering those things. But again, keep in mind that California fair housing discrimination is significantly broader in its scope than this relatively narrow issue of hate speech and those criteria. We have any more questions that I have not covered?
Yeah, we have
May I
one
see
more.
them, please?
Do you want to talk
Can
about
you
this?
talk about, buyer love letters? Here's the deal. I'm a buyer and I'm white, and I write a letter to the seller, whether it goes through the realtor, whether it doesn't go to the realtor, and I say something, or I attach a photograph, or I do something like that, and I'm chosen, and persons of color or some other objectively verifiable trait are not chosen, there could be an argument, and it could be very subtle. What I think I'd like to do, first of all, I want to point you to the CAR site. They have materials there that cover what is and what is not a hate speech. Katie Johnson wrote a letter. Katie Johnson's the attorney, the chief attorney, the big Ms. Big at NAR, and she wrote a great letter that Barbara Betts sent me that has a lot of reasons why those love letters are problematic. Now, a love letter that simply says, I'm a contractor and I can't wait to get your house because I'm gonna, retile it and I'm gonna do that to your TV room, or I'm gonna actually do something to the gym so someone will actually use it, or whatever. I don't see that being a problem. But if I say something, let me give you an example where I'm a white person and the seller has a whole number of offers, and she gets a letter from a friend of one of her neighbors saying, I can't wait to move into the neighborhood. I will blend in so well. And I'm going to be so excited about all the things your neighborhood does. And she's white, but there were 13 other offers, some from people of color. Could there be an implication there that I chose her? Because now I will tell you that seller told me very clearly, no, it had nothing to do with that. I was excited for my neighbor to have her best friend close by. So the word, Barbara, you're correct, is binary, and I will give Lori and Linda an actual definition. I just don't have it here, and I don't want to misstate. Okay, Pauline, when getting ready to sell a house, I know many agents recommend removing religious items in homes, goal to make home look like a blank canvas. You guys, you could, if you're doing it because the person, I suppose I could see, stretching an argument from a discrimination standpoint, not from a hate speech argument. Maybe I'm, I don't know. To me, that's where it's going to start getting a little bit dangerous. I'm a realtor. My realtor told us how to stage our home. I hated it because my wife got rid of a lot of furniture that I liked. But the reality is that, if that's the case, I think where it came up though, Pauline, is in an area where the appraiser, they did a test, and the appraiser came in, and in the first test, they had pictures of African Americans all over the house, family portraits, right? And the appraiser appraised the property, and then another appraiser came in and appraised the property substantially higher when all the photographs of Black people were removed. So that, that clearly, but is that hate speech? No, there's no hate speech involved, but there's clearly discrimination going on. The hate speech would be involved if somebody would have said something about that. To clarify social media actions, so if someone likes a racist comment someone else posted, it can become actionable. Possibly, yes. Monica, the answer to that question is it could become possible. So you got to be careful about what you like. I don't know how far that's going to go, frankly. We're going to have to see, because I may like something simply because of another aspect of that post. And so, we're going to have to take a look at that. But in talking to the NAR lawyers yesterday, I'm not sure if Diane's a lawyer, but the NAR people yesterday, yeah, there could be some claim. It depends. If all I did was I posted something and I made a comment, these stupid, pick a race, pick a gender identification, whatever, are the worst people in the world, and they all should go to hell. And I like that. after November 13th. Yeah, you could probably get it. What if it's a long post? I've been reading this morning for the first time in my life. I found Facebook interesting. I could care less about your pork chops, but it was interesting this morning to see all of the commentary go on. And there was a lot of good commentary, some of which had kernels of what I would consider hateful speech in it. It's going to be interesting to see how you guys deal with that. Sellers have the right to choose their own buyer. How can you prove the buyer picked a buyer because of race? It's implication. Again, you prove a lot of things by implication, don't you? You look at evidence and what does it point to, right? It's called corroborating evidence, circumstantial evidence. So there are situations. We had an example given to us in Maryland where the buyer's agent was Black. The potential buyers were white. The listing agent did not accompany anybody. The buyer's agent accompanied the buyer, which I'm finding now as my house is for sale is the most common thing, to the property. And when the seller opened the door, saw the Black woman, who was the realtor, who happened to be the president of the board, said to the sellers, "You two can come in, you stay outside." Now, the question in that situation was, because the agent called the listing agent and said, "This is what happened." And the response was, "Well, that's my seller's choice." But remember what the Article 10 says, plan, scheme, or agreement to discriminate. So then the question becomes for you guys, did her comment, "Too bad for you," rise to the level of discrimination? That's an Article 10 violation. But what if the woman would have responded, "Well, then you shouldn't have put your Black this or Black that or gay this or gay that. You shouldn't have gone with them. You should have sent a white agent, that neighborhood." Now you raise to the level of a 10.5. So again, it's just going to depend on this is going to be, I believe, very factually intensive. We're going to have to really look at these things very, very carefully on a case-by-case basis. We're going to have to be consistent in the way we approach it, but not so consistent in the way the facts are going to be different in every single situation. If you receive a love letter with an offer and it contains some comments, well, again, these are issues. This is a great question. You receive a love letter, person's anonymous, so I don't have to consider this, but I will. And it contains some comments that you have addressed in this webinar. How would you handle it? You should handle it at the listing, or if you've already got the listing, you should go back and have these conversations. What Ed Zorn says is put some comments and I agree. I think Ed made Ed's the attorney for CRMLS. Put something in HR remarks, love letters or, buyer letters, whatever you guys are calling them, will not be, the seller has requested no love letters. That can solve your problem. Or you can simply comment that, please be very cognizant of fair housing comments and all of those kinds of things. At the end of the day, though, you need to confirm with your sellers that, these things are not going to be acceptable. So these are conversations you have with your seller. There's one of the things I see, and this is totally unrelated to today, but what I see in talking about risk management is frankly, how can I, not you, any of you guys are awesome. I know you all do a great job, blah, blah, blah. But the reality that a lot of agents don't spend enough time with their sellers educating them on the process, right? I mean, they sit down, just like if you went to a lawyer and you've never been sued before, wouldn't you want to know, about interrogatories, depositions, what's going to happen, what kind of court situations, what's my chance? We always hear, what percentage do I have of success or failure? All those kinds of things, right? Well, as a seller of property, what if I'm a first-time seller, a first-time home buyer, right? We don't do enough to educate. There's an issue that's going to be coming up very, very soon where non-members of the MLS are going to be entitled under certain circumstances to your lockbox access. And you're going to have to sit down with your sellers and talk about how are we going to deal with access when we don't even have a person who's a member of the MLS wanting access to show the property. So you got to have educational conversations with these sellers, because the reason they're hiring you is they don't know what they don't know. You know what they're supposed to know, and you need to educate them. This is one of those areas, right? And if you get a seller who is pretty clearly not going to want to show property to Black people, or not going to want to deal with people who are or are not gay, or those kind, you ought to ask yourself, is it worth the risk to take this listing? Now, for today's purposes, you're well past that. you're now in the stage where there's been some behavior. So I guess no, there's more. Charlie, good to see you, my friend. I wish we were together. I miss you a lot. Charlie's a lawyer also, and one of the funnest people I know, and one of the finest. Maybe it's because I am old. You are definitely old. But this all comes down to common sense. It is an expansion of discrimination rules we've been dealing with for years. If you use common sense in dealing with clients, you should be okay. I couldn't agree more. The distinction, Charlie, is this, is when I took that implied bias program, I watched the video, there were things I didn't even think were biased. The ways I approached my thought, the ways I thought, some stuff clearly I'm trying to be careful about watching my language. Linda's been yelling at me and my wife have been yelling at me for decades about that. And I understand that. I've got to clean that up in the way I talk to people. But there's things I didn't even realize. Let me give you an example. Probably end up getting fired for this, but let me give you an example. My wife wanted to go on a gospel cruise. It wasn't a music cruise, but it was a gospel cruise. And there were 2,200 people on the cruise, of which probably less than 100 were Caucasian. Most of the audience was African American. And I sat there in a completely different environment than some of my friends who might go on a cruise or might go in a place where they're the 100 of the 2,000, right? And you start, how do you approach that kind of thought process? What are you thinking? How are you appearing? In fact, I made friends because we had the same seat every night with the fellow who sat next to me. He's a lawyer from Chicago, African-American fellow. And he asked me, how do you feel about this? And he said, are you being treated okay? And he made some joke about my dancing, which of course was okay. Could have, and we had become friends over that week, and he was genuinely concerned. But you start thinking about, how do you react in certain situations with certain people? Do you react in the same way with your black friends or your gay friends as you do with your white friends or your, what is the term, straight friends? How do you deal with that? So I think that, recognizing these sort of differences of how you approach things could be very valuable to you. But I agree with you, Charlie, that we're expanding, we're evolving. And frankly, at this stage of my life, which is pretty close to the stage of your life, I wish we had, grown up outside of all this, where we stop judging people based on things that they have no control over, their race, their color, all of their disability. And we start dealing with people based on their character, their integrity, and all of that. But, it is what it is. We'll get better. Any other comment? No question. So look at that. I'm getting you guys out of here 10 minutes early. So I hope you found today valuable. I got to urge you that we're just at the beginning of this. We're going to keep you posted. Like I said, whether it's me or another lawyer as time goes on, you're going to have Linda, you're going to have Lori, you guys are so blessed to have those two in your corner. I'm going to do the best I can for you in coming up with this. Thank you, Michelle. It's always good to hear from you. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for all the thank yous. Appreciate that. But I got to tell you that I think that we're just at the beginning of what's going to be a really interesting conversation. And I'm hopeful that we'll all look at it. I have a good friend of mine who says we need to have more adult conversations. And what I'm seeing from the press and from our politicians and from a lot of other people are not what I would call adult conversations. When I talk to Phil, Connie, Barbara, Denise, I'm having adult conversations. And it's so fun to sit down and they enable you. They raise you to another level. Working with Linda all these years, working with Lori all these years, they raise you to another level. Or you can choose to be one of those people that live their lives by tearing other people down. And I'm hoping that this is going to be an interesting journey for all of us. And we'll find out, won't we? So I'll be doing some professional standards training for you kids down the road. I just finished the PowerPoints. We're going to talk about COVID. We're going to talk about emerging liability issues. We're going to talk about the code of ethics in relation to what's going on, what the DRE is doing, all the new stuff, the Department of Justice settlement, all that's going to be coming up in the next 30 days. I'm going to do a property management class for one of the boards. I'm going to be doing brown bags and legal panels. So, and then there's other people doing equally valuable things. One of the things I think, if anyone ever wondered whether they should be a realtor, the boards during this pandemic have answered that question and said, absolutely, it's the best value for your money. So I congratulate you on that. So with that, I will say goodbye. Jake, thank you. Jake is 12 and he's actually Bob Tyler's son, and he's absolutely wonderful. So I appreciate you, Jake. Appreciate Nathan and his help. Laura, Linda, Lori, thank you as always. And again, thank you for attending today, all 130 something of you. I was shocked to see that many. I wish it was live so I could yell at you to your face, but I can't. So until we see each other again under more normal circumstances, I bid you adieu.